What's up again, everybody? Well, we're basically in full swing for spoiler season at this point, even though spoiler season doesn't show up for another couple of weeks. 2 weeks? 2 weeks? Wow, that's coming up soon. I got to start working on a spoiler video. Nevertheless, we're basically in spoiler season because I don't know if you saw this, but watch your step. We got some stuff to talk about, but first things first, I want to talk about these 3 cards that came out in Crucible of War and how they are essentially re-releasing them in a way that allows for players to pick them up basically for free. And not only that, but this is actually a way that they could release heroes in the future, like heroes that hit living legend status. We'll talk about it in a second. First things first, this is a really interesting article with some good little snippets from James White, the creator of Flesh and Blood. It says, when designing Outsiders, we wanted to revisit traps to differentiate the 2 Rangers, Azalea and Riptide, that feature in this product, and also because they offer a natural shared flavor that sits well with the Assassin Ranger hybrid cards, which is something that I'm very much looking forward to them kind of diving into more. The problem was they just couldn't get the traps to a state of playability with the hardwired condition that they had to be played from Arsenal. Now, here's the interesting thing. Traps came about in Crucible of War with these 3 cards, and on the face of it, they were really fun to play. They were really interesting, and they kind of encouraged you to play, at the time, Trap Azalea to some degree, like a defensive Azalea. But the fact that you had to play them from Arsenal and that all of them minus, well, the other 2, minus Tripwire Trap, this one blocks for 4 for nothing, and that one felt pretty decent. The effect was like meh on it, but it was at least a 0 for 4. The other 2 had like marginally better effects, like for example, this one just deals 2 damage, kind of like Reckless Swing, but unfortunately it's a 0 for 3. It pitched yellow, but it was a 0 for 3, and because you had to play it from Arsenal, it was really lackluster overall, even though it did have probably a better effect in my opinion. And then Rock Slide Trap was just, it was just so not good. I mean, it was a 0 for 2 that had to be played from your Arsenal, because at this time traps all had to be played from your Arsenal. And yeah, it just gave -2. And they could pay around it. And so it was kind of like a 0 for 4 that they could basically say no to. It was just not, these were all kind of hamstrung by the fact that you had to play them from Arsenal, and as a Ranger, you want to be using your Arsenal for arrows, particularly as Azalea, and this does not have a reload mechanic. So with that being understood, they went back to the drawing board and they kind of scrapped the hardwired condition that they need to be played from Arsenal, and instead, they are now allowing you to play traps going forward from the hand, which is great because it's essentially now defense reactions, but special for Ranger. Now these 3 cards, and this is my favorite part of this announcement, these 3 cards are functionally being errated, as I showed you, to include the word trap at the bottom. So for example, here's Tripwire Trap. Down at the bottom, Ranger defense reaction -trap. And they took away the parenthetical text and the keyword of trap, and now they're just putting that on there so that this card is functionally identical in the way that it plays, but future traps aren't necessarily going to have the trap keyword that forces them to be played from Arsenal. And furthermore, they've taken these 3 cards, which came out in Crucible of War 2 years ago at this point, basically, and they are basically putting them together into a tuck box and sending them to stores so that players can just get this in, like, just literally have these cards. They just get them in hand. Now, this is the second time they've done exactly this, because they did the same thing with the errated Briar text. So when they took Briar, Warden of Thorns, and Briar, and they just changed the functionality so that you can only create 1 embodiment of Earth per turn, they sent out like some errated versions, and they had errated versions on hand at tournaments as well for a little while, where you could get your hands on that and you could play that version instead. They're doing the same thing with these 3 cards. And when I saw that they were doing this again, I was like, this is what you could do to re-release Living Legend heroes. I know that has really nothing to do or no bearing on these 3 cards and the way traps are going, but they could literally just do this instead of having to like force themselves to include these characters in a supplemental set down the road, or in a draft set, which would be very kind of weird to have that as a token. Including a Living Legend character as a token The reimagining, for example, of Prism could just as easily be created, and then 36 of them could be put into a tuck box, and everyone in the store can get one. And then maybe they have like multiple boxes you can get your hands on, and literally you can just disseminate a new hero like that. I think that is a really interesting prospect, and one that I want to know your opinion of. Do you think they should do that, or does that create like this weird bottleneck where everybody just like can't get their hands on that hero unless the store gets like multiple boxes of these? I think it's a really good idea as a way that this sort of kind of, they're distributing these 3 cards. They can do the same thing with like a brand new chain or a brand new Prism. They could do that. Let me know in a comment below what you think about that. And essentially these are being included alongside of the March Armory Kit, which has some spoilers in it. So we're going to talk about those here in a second. But at the very bottom, they said these updated traps can be distributed at the discretion of stores who receive them. We do expect the original traps to be relevant after the release of Outsiders, which will be interesting. I'm not so sure. It depends on, really it depends on what Riptide kind of does, because these are very much, I guess, being targeted towards Riptide. Azalea right now doesn't necessarily play on these traps, and she's been around for, ever. Since Arcane Rising, and ever since these were released in Crew, she hasn't really dipped her toes back into them. So I don't really foresee these 3 cards being that well represented in Azalea as of right now. But Riptide is a whole nother story, because we have no clue what he does right now, and he was tagged as the Trap Ranger when they announced him. And then they showed this card, and this card is so stinking good, it just makes me sing. It's a collapsing trap. It costs nothing to play this trap as a defense reaction. It blocks for 3, so you think that's kind of mediocre. It's a 0 for 3, but don't forget this pitch is blue, which is quite good. And this is a legendary Riptide specialization, so you can only have 1 collapsing trap in your deck, and only if you're Riptide. But it says this: when this defends an attack with Go Again, not an attack action card, literally just an attack with Go Again. So any weapon attack that has Go Again, any attack action card that has Go Again, when this defends that, the attacking hero discards their entire hand and then draws that many cards -1. That is so stinking good. That card is so good. It basically just nukes your opponent's plans for their turn by swinging. That is so awesome. Now, it is interesting because this card is a 1-of in your deck. So if you're playing Classic Constructed, you really probably want to pick your battles and kind of choose the moment you think that this will be the most beneficial to you. And so you may actually be, depending on how Riptide, of course, plays, you may actually be incentivized to arsenal this card like you would the old traps and just sit there and wait, which is kind of funny when you think about it, because like they just took away the stipulation that it had to be played from Arsenal, and yet this one might actually be good to play from Arsenal. But even if you just play this sort of with advantage on like a turn, in a tempo-oriented way, because everyone knows what tempo means. If you play it like that, it's still very good. It can basically just turn off a turn because you're stealing a card from their hand, you're blocking some damage as well, and you're ruining their original best laid plans. Now, of course, yes, they could draw into something better, but this is still really stinking cool. And as a Majestic, this is going to be one that you want to pick up. And if you're going to play Riptide, this is like a shoe-in for the deck. And honestly, if we're talking like a draft kind of set, this is really good in draft as well, because you're basically creating card advantage in a way. You're giving up this card. Your opponent's losing out on attack based on what they're doing, and they're losing a card, multiple cards perhaps, because they're tossing the rest of their hand into the graveyard. And if you can catch them on a really good hand, then you can nuke their threat density. Very, very cool. And that also leads me to the March Armory Kit, which I'm just going to click right here. This Armory Kit is looking quite spicy. So this is the March Armory Kit, and it actually shows us the 3 tokens, or the 3, I should say, attack reactions that create the tokens, and a brand new bow that we are most certainly going to click and talk about. Also, check out the Utsuri mat. Look at that mat. That's going to look amazing. It's got the hero art for Utsuri, which is amazing. We can actually see the bow along with the close up shots of these 3 attack reactions that we did see spoiled a few weeks ago. But check this bow out. Barbed Castaway. This is a ranger weapon bow, two-handed. As with all other bows, no attack, of course, because you are using this bow to load arrows. Once per turn instant, so you can do it on your turn or on your opponent's turn, pay 1 resource. You may put an arrow card from your hand face up into your arsenal. Now, you can't do, well, you technically can do this along with the second effect if you're playing New Horizons, but outside of that, you're most likely going to choose one or the other, because the other effect says once per turn instant, pay 1. You may turn a face-down arrow in your arsenal face up. If you do, put an aim counter on it. So just kind of like with the stealth mechanic, wherein the stealth mechanic doesn't really do something by itself, but it enables other cards. Aim counters for rangers also enable cards, and specifically arrows, to do extra stuff. So we already have a few cards that say if this arrow has an aim counter on it, do this. Drill shot's a really good one, by the way. But the same thing is true with cards that we're going to most likely see in this set, and this bow immediately enables those effects, which is interesting because, like, for example, Death Dealer, when you compare this to Death Dealer, the original, the OG bow, which literally just said pay 1, put an arrow and then draw a card. The question becomes, is the pay 1, draw a card always just better than an aim counter? And the balance there in Classic Constructed is going to be really interesting to see. Are there enough arrows that benefit so greatly from aim counters that it's better than just an overall drawing a card? That's what I'm very curious to see. But I do think this has a lot of really decent utility overall. You get the guaranteed just like load an arrow face up. You can technically use both of these effects if you have New Horizon, because you can use the bottom effect first, flip an arrow card face up. That gives you a second arsenal slot, and then you can put another arrow face up into your arsenal. So you technically could do both. It's just expensive. Nevertheless, is a really cool looking bow as well. And of course, you've got the 3 attack reactions that you can also pick up, along with the cold foil version of Barbed Castaway. I am very much looking forward to seeing how they're stretching these, just the overall, I guess I should say, design spaces, but really stretching these Ranger keywords and Ranger mechanics, because they very much said Ranger is on the agenda for fixing. And if that's what they're aiming to do, then they've got some interesting things in the works, because, I'll just put it this way. So maybe Ranger needs a little bit of fixing. So we shall see if they have that really on the docket for this set. But if they're going to do it, it's going to be a set like this. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed talking about Ranger things and you're part of the Azalea cult, leave a comment down below and make that number climb slightly higher to another number. Numbers going up, that's cool. Join the club. As always, thanks for watching.